Hello everyone, it's good to have you with us for the second webinar in our Winter-Spring series, Success for Every Learner, From At-Risk to Successful. I'm Clay Whitehead, the co-founder and co-CEO of Presence Learning, sponsor of the SPED Ahead webinars. Presence Learning provides online speech therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral intervention, and mental health services to school districts and families across the country. Your needs and requests for expert advice to improve the outcome of your services drives this program and is the reason for this current series. Helping every child succeed, including those who are most at risk, has come front and center in the national debate, especially now that Congress has finally updated ESSA. It's clearly time to try new approaches to achieve what we need to do. With that in mind, we began this series with Dr. Frances Stetson, who delivered a very inspiring presentation. Frances also gave our audience a resource packet that includes several practical tools to help us create culturally responsive schools that fully include children of color and students with disabilities. We appreciate how you've embraced that package of materials and the incredible response we've received to her webinar. Today we have with us Dr. Ed Dunkelblau, one of the world's most knowledgeable and most respected leaders and advocates for social and emotional learning, also known as SEL. This series concludes in May when we look at an evidence-based approach that is gaining a lot of attention as a way to help all students succeed, the CPS model, and hear from its chief architect, Dr. Ross Green. A quick reminder that I will be moderating a Q&A with Dr. Dunkelblau immediately following his presentation. If you have any questions during the program, enter those into the question box on your screen and send them along. We'll answer as many as time allows. Now, I'd like to lead in today's presentation with a few what-if questions that will help you get into the SEL mindset. What if there was a way you could easily and effectively improve student behavior and attention in your classrooms? What if you could improve your students' self-esteem while making your job easier? What if we could improve GPA and test scores significantly without major changes to procedures or to the curriculum? And finally, what if there was a simple way for you to reduce students' anxiety while also increasing their engagement? Would you do it? To convince us to say yes to these important questions, I'd like to welcome Dr. Ed Dunkelblau and share with you his background and why he is so important to the SEL movement. Ed is Director for the Institute of Emotionally Intelligent Learning and a licensed clinical psychologist. He is a well-known speaker on the topics of social emotional intelligence, humor, and health. Dr. Dunkelblau has 2 master's degrees from Columbia University, one in psychology and the other in vocational and rehabilitation counseling. Ed also holds a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Kansas, where he was recently recognized as a distinguished alum. Dr. Dunkelblau consults regularly with school administrators and special education leaders on the implementation of social emotional literacy programs. His work has been featured in the Chicago Tribune, USA Weekend, and CNN. Ed, it's over to you.
Thanks, Clay, for that warm welcome and for posing these important questions to our audience. I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this series. Helping every learner succeed is really an important challenge for us and one I'm sure that everyone in the audience can appreciate. Your last question to the audience, would you do it? I would hope that everyone listening would have a resounding yes to that, given that all of us seek the best way to educate our children, both with regard to the regular ed population and especially the special ed population or the population of students who have special needs, who are at risk or at opportunity. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make a case for how to do that, how to do it effectively, how to do it relatively inexpensively, and how to do it in a way so that all students benefit. So let me start with a quick story. I was in New York, coming back to Chicago where I live, and I was at the airport in line at the gate waiting for my airplane. In front of me, there was a man on his cell phone shouting into his cell phone. At one point, he shuts off his cell phone. He runs up to the gate agent's desk. He pushes a woman out of the way, screams at the gate agent, "I just heard there's weather in the Midwest. It's coming this way. I have an important business meeting. Are we taking off on time?" The gate agent types up whatever she types up on her computer. She says to the man, "Yes, sir, as far as I know, we are taking off on time." He screams at her, "Are you sure? Very important meeting." She says, "Sir, as far as I know, we're taking off on time." He comes back in line, punches up his cell phone again. starts shouting in a second time, "Where is it? Cleveland? You sure? Thunderstorms?" Shuts off his cell phone a second time, leaps up to the gate agent's desk a second time, screams at the gate agent, "I just heard there are thunderstorms over Cleveland, and they're coming this way. Are you sure we're taking off on time? I have a very important meeting." She says, "Sir, as far as I know, we're taking off on time," and then says, "Please get back in line." At this moment, and this is absolutely true, the woman behind me taps me on the shoulder and says, "I think he needs decaf." It's now his turn to go talk to the gate agent. He walks up to the gate agent's desk, takes out his boarding pass, smacks it on the desk, and says, "I want an aisle seat. Give me an aisle seat." She types something up on the computer, looks up at the man, and says, "Sir, I'm sorry, but the flight is completely full. There are no aisle seats." "Well, what do you mean there are no aisle seats?" "Sir, it's a full flight. There are no aisle seats." "Well, are you sure we're taking off on time?" "Sir, as far as I know, we are taking off on time. The flight is full. There are no aisle seats. Now please step aside." He walks away, punches up his cell phone, and I'm next in line. I go up to the gate agent's desk. I look at her, and I said, "I wouldn't want your job for anything in the world." She smiles, says to me, "It's really not so bad. What can I do for you?" So I look at her sheepishly, and I said, "I was kind of hoping for an aisle seat." She laughed, and I laughed, and she said, "As you may have heard, the flight is full and there are no aisle seats. But why don't you leave me your boarding pass and we'll see what happens." I got my aisle seat. He didn't. By all rules of the street, he was there first. He should have achieved his goals before I achieved mine. But because of how he was handling his stress, because of how he was able to express himself, and because, most importantly, of how he was able to interact with people that could help him, he struggled to get his goals met. That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about creating a situation and building skills that will allow our students, regular ed and special needs, to get their needs met by handling their feelings, relationships, and motivation in a way that helps them be successful. I try to have all the great educator and philosopher theorists in my presentations, and this is one of my favorite. Dumbledore says it's not our abilities that show who we truly are, but it's our choices. And I think we can all agree with all this. So now, we're going to talk about social-emotional learning, social-emotional skills, and social-emotional competence, which has become very well known over the past few years and very popular, but it's not a new concept. If you look at the screen, this is a report card, a middle school report card from 1960. And if you look at the top, you'll see language arts and math and social studies and science, all the things you'd expect to see on a report card. But then if you go down to personal adjustment, you'll see other listings: courtesy, dependability, cooperation, self-control. These are things that we often don't see on report cards anymore. So my point is that this is not new, but it went away with the space race and the focus on STEM and achievement. I think we lost track of the importance of social-emotional competence. Now, you're probably thinking it takes a lot of guts for a presenter to put his junior high report card up in the presentation. And you're right, it does. This is my sister's report card, not mine. And she, as you can see, is quite emotionally intelligent, though I would argue at home it probably didn't generalize as much as everybody thinks it did. So if you look at the next slide, you'll notice that I have that social-emotional learning and character development is an important pairing. Let me show you a slide that highlights that. If we were going on a trip, we would essentially need two things. We would need a vehicle, and we would need a map or GPS. So we need a way of getting there, and we need some way of knowing how to go. In doing our educational tasks, in meeting our educational needs for our students, we have the same set of needs. We need the vehicle, and we need the map. The vehicle in education is social-emotional learning. It's the how we get there. The goal, the task, the compass, the GPS, the map is character education, the internal compass that tells us what we need to do to get there. By combining these two things, we can create an optimal learning environment that allows for our students to be successful. Physiologically, it makes sense. Our brains are wired so that we survive, and part of that wiring is the fight-flight response that's kind of mediated by the amygdala, which is a little almond-shaped organ in our brain. When we're faced with threat, the amygdala responds by causing us to react as opposed to think, to keep us alive. So if you're driving along and someone cuts you off, if you stop and think about, well, what should I do? Should I turn the wheel? Should I hit the brake? Should I motion to the driver with one of my fingers? Rather than do that, our amygdala kicks in, we've turned the wheel, we've hit the brake, even before we've thought about it to keep us alive. That's what the amygdala is for. But in the classroom, there are very few life-threatening things that require us to respond, but our brain doesn't always know that. So we need to train our brains to not respond with just a reaction, but to be able to think about things that we can do to respond to difficult situations. That's what building social emotional competence is all about. So I hear everyone asking, what do marshmallows and SAT scores have in common? It's a common question that comes up. Not really. But it cues me to tell a very quick story that some researchers out in California did what was called the marshmallow test, and you can go online on YouTube and look up marshmallow test and actually see examples of this, where they asked children to postpone gratification by not eating marshmallows that were in front of them by saying, if you postpone gratification, you can have more, or you can eat the one you have if you don't want to wait. And they found that the kids who were able to wait did much better in their future academic life. They even found that SAT scores were higher, 110 points higher, for those kids who were able to wait. They followed them all the way through college. So what we're saying here is that by teaching the set of skills that allow the kids to postpone gratification, to follow directions, to do the things involved in the marshmallow test, it seems to correlate with academic achievement. Every teacher deals with challenges. Every teacher deals with a room full of students who are bringing things with them from home, from work, from family, from background, from history, all things that get in the way of them being ready to learn. So we have to teach students a set of skills that allow them to focus, understand, and respond to the learning that's going on in the classroom. And this is especially true for special ed kids. This is especially true for high needs, high risk, high opportunity students. We have to be able to help them overcome whatever impediments or roadblocks that they bring with them to the classroom so that they can focus. We can have the best content in the world, the best curriculum in the world, but if they're not able to focus, if they're not able to understand, if they're not able to quiet their own sense of concern and distraction, it's very hard for us to be effective from an educational point of view. This is why we have to focus on social emotional learning. This is why I'm so passionate that every educator needs to be aware and intentional about social emotional programming. We know it can be taught. We know it's not restricted only to childhood, but people can learn it through the life cycle. It's through modeling that kids really can acquire these skills, and it'll serve them in every stage of their education and, in fact, every stage of their life. What we're talking about here is social emotional learning skills, also known as social emotional literacy, social emotional character development, or even emotional intelligence. So let's take you through what we're talking about when we're talking about social emotional learning. First off is self-awareness, recognizing and being able to name what you're feeling and understanding why you're feeling what you're feeling. Another is self-regulation, being able to express and verbalize what you're feeling with regard to anger, depression, anxiety, being able to cope with those feelings, handling your impulses, and then also recognizing and mobilizing positive feelings and your strengths with regard to work and about yourself. We're talking about self-monitoring and performance, so being able to focus, setting short and long-term goals, modifying your performance in the light of feedback, mobilizing positive motivation and activating your sense of hope and optimism. Empathy and perspective taking. People ask me, which one is the most important? Well, they're all important, but this is one that's really key. It's your ability to empathize, to be a good listener, and to be able to take the perspective of others. So, in other words, for me to understand what you're feeling, for me to be able to see the world through your eyes. It's my belief that if you can master these skills, aggression, concern, and war comes to an end. So, not that I have high hopes for this one, but I really believe we need to be intentional about building these skills. Next one is the social skills and handling relationships. So being able to manage relationships, being able to harmonize feelings and points of view that don't agree with your own, handling emotions effectively, exercising leadership, assertiveness, and being able to be persuasive and also accept influence from others and being able to work as part of a team. Continuing to be sensitive to social cues of others, exercising your problem-solving skills. This is so important. Having a method for dealing with problems that works and that you can access even when you're under stress. And then responding constructively to obstacles in an effective problem-solving manner. So that's what we're talking about here. Now you have a previous presenter, those of you that heard Francis Stetson's presentation, know that social-emotional learning presumes a part of success rests in the relationship of the teacher and the student. My bias is that relationship is almost everything. That content of curriculum is important, but relationship between student and teacher, relationship between student and student, and even relationship between teacher and teacher and teacher and administrator are key to effective learning environments. Without that, it's very hard to have an effective learning environment. Here are a whole bunch of examples of why SEL instruction is important. The goal here is not to have you read every single one and memorize them, but is to overwhelm you with the observations and evidence that this stuff is not only important to attend to, but vital for educators to be cognizant of and to include in their educational processes. So it builds a stronger sense of community, motivation. There are a better understanding of what happens when I do stuff, my consequences of my behavior. It makes students more effective in coping with stressors. It builds more positive attitudes. It builds a greater effort to achieve. There's more participation and a higher level of engagement. Every educator knows that engagement is key to learning. They're more likely to figure out their own ways of learning, fewer absences, improved attendance. It's on track to graduate. There are fewer dropouts. There's more pro-social behavior. There's reduction in aggression. I love this one that Zinn talks about. Fewer hostile negotiations. In other words, not as much fighting. Fewer suspensions and a better transition to middle school in those in elementary school. And is there anyone that wouldn't want all of these things for their students? It's kind of overwhelmingly positive. Now, those were based on observational data. Then Durlak and Weisberg did a meta-analysis of social-emotional learning programming across the country, and they found a couple of very interesting things. They reviewed 213 programs. They examined the impacts of these programs and looked at the long-term effects. Both Weisberg and Durlak are affiliated with CASEL, C-A-S-E-L. CASEL is kind of all things social-emotional. CASEL.org is probably your first stop when looking for resources and information regarding social-emotional learning. So let me talk about what the Durlak-Weisberg meta-analysis revealed. First off, they revealed social-emotional skills performance increases by 88% when students are in social-emotional learning programming. Well, that makes sense. You got to wonder what happened to the 12%. Everybody should be improving their SEL skills. It increases positive self-perceptions. It increases connection to school. Again, they showed an increase in pro-social attitudes. They also found a decrease in aggressive behavior, decrease in disruptive classroom behavior, a decrease in substance abuse, decrease in depression and anxiety. They found that kids are more likely to attend school, less likely to be disciplined, and more likely to receive better grades. So think about this. By doing SEL programming in your school, you increase everything you want to go up, you decrease everything you want to go down, and then there's a big payoff. They also found that there was improvement on achievement test performance, about 11% improvement without changing the academic curriculum. I think we can all agree that if we can improve academic test performance, it's a win-win-win for everyone, especially if we don't have to change the academics to teach only to the test. By providing these skills, we provide the students the set of skills that allow them to achieve, and that is key. That's the bottom line for us. They also found that after 2 years, the outcomes stick. So they seem to be significant and they seem to maintain. Okay, if you notice on the slide, I have a quote from James Comer, who is a brilliant physician and educational philosopher, who says that no significant learning occurs without significant relationship. I think every educator knows this, but even more so, every special educator, every educator of high-risk students knows that without that relationship, learning becomes much more difficult. That's been one of the challenges, especially with the kids on the spectrum, is finding ways to reach them because relationship becomes more of a challenge. So being able to teach the social emotional competencies becomes even more important. Let's look at exactly why this SEL is so important. It takes into account that emotions affect how and what we learn, and I think anyone who's been through school knows that emotions affect learning. If we're distracted, if we're upset, if we're anxious, that's going to impact our ability to attend and learn. And with a special needs population, those emotions are even more at play. Relationships provide the foundation of learning, as we mentioned. All of these skills can be taught. They positively affect performance. And there's also benefits to physical health. Plus, when the kids get out of school into the workforce, this is what employers look for. When two employees seek a job, when they're two prospective employees, employers are going to choose those people with the best social emotional competence because they get along better, they're more likely to stick to the job, and they're more likely to be successful and effective. Lifelong success at home, at work, and at school, and the risk of maladjustment goes down. So what we're doing here is we're providing a framework to overcome fragmentation. So what do I mean by fragmentation? Let's talk about a school. Every school does programming to address these concerns. Every school does programming to address parents, violence, drug use, after-school activities, character building, academics, all of those things. What we've found is the issue is that every school's doing it, but there's no coordination or limited coordination. There's no way to organize all of those things so that they're consistent, so they're additive, and so that they're focused and make the most sense to the staff and to the students. What social emotional learning does is it provides an overarching way to organize all of those things so they fit together in a cohesive whole. So we're taking the jumbled schoolhouse and build it into the cohesive, coordinated schoolhouse. And that really potentiates all the programming that's going on, and it really gives us the most bang for our buck. So, the school administration, the educators understand that effective social emotional learning programs are essential to our students' academic success. And if that's true for a regular ed population, that goes double for a special ed or higher needs population. We also know that we have to continually enhance the transfer of social emotional learning into everyday life. So it's not just learning the skills in the classroom and then going out and behaving as if I never heard any of this stuff. We have to find ways to make the transfer. When I first started working with schools developing these programs, we found that the students were able to report back and tell you what the skill was and what they're supposed to do, and then they would go out in the schoolyard or they'd go to the gym and act as if they had never been in that classroom. So we really need to infuse the social emotional support and learning throughout the school day and even at home with parents, after-school activities, in sports, throughout the entire student experience. So here are some guidelines for programs. We want to establish a school climate that articulates what our values are and what our needs are. We want to build a caring, supportive, and challenging classroom that support teaching and learning. Especially in special needs kids, the classroom has to be safe, it has to be caring, it has to be supportive, it has to be encouraging, it has to provide curricular information in a way the student can absorb it and understand it, and it has to help the student become learning ready by reducing anxiety, reducing external stimulation, and increasing focus. Social emotional learning and character education does all of that. Just teaching social emotional skills is not enough. Some schools set aside 5 minutes in the morning, the social emotional 5 minutes. That's not going to do it. Social emotional readiness, social emotional competence has to be infused throughout the regular academic curriculum and the special ed curriculum. Special ed teachers know this. They know that you can't just teach academics, that you have to address behavior, you have to address emotions, and you have to address relationships throughout the school day, throughout the classroom, throughout the school, throughout the curriculum, and throughout the entire school community. By increasing SEL, social emotional learning, character education, and life skills, what you're doing is maximizing the opportunities to learn these skills. Imagine you were teaching reading, but you only taught reading 5 minutes a day, or one class per day, or one class per week. That's not how you would expect students to become expert readers. Reading encompasses their entire school day, in every classroom, in every part of their educational experience. That's what we need to do with social emotional skills as well. Also, what we found is we surveyed schools about how well they're infusing social emotional skills throughout the entire curriculum. And we found that teachers felt like they were doing a great job. Students reported that they barely got any. Now, who was right? Well, they were both right. Because what we found is that educators were infusing social emotional skill building into their teaching, but they were doing it in a stealth way. What we found is that it becomes more generalizable when it's done intentionally and identified as intentional and labeled as such, because then the kids know what it is and they know how to apply it in other circumstances. So health promotion, problem prevention skills, setting up systems to enhance coping skills and social support for transitions, crises, resolve conflicts. Working with high needs populations, we know this, and building social emotional competence, building problem-solving protocols is a great way to reduce crises, resolve conflicts, and help with transitions. Providing opportunity for reflection and internal monitoring is key for these populations. And you want to foster pervasive social-emotional learning and character ed throughout the school and home. Providing ongoing support seems to be another key element. Every school wants to do this, but every school has competing priorities. By having ongoing support, if possible, external support, what that does is it keeps the focus on social emotional competence, and it reduces the likelihood that there'll be distraction from some of the other needs of the school. All the needs are important, but what every educator that's experienced knows that most initiatives come and go in about 18 months, and if they only white-knuckle it through that 18 months, they'll go away and something else will come instead. What we need to do is make sure that social-emotional learning is, if not front and center, sharing the spotlight so it doesn't go away and people know it's a process and method that's here to stay. Kurt Vonnegut had a great perspective. The slide I have up now is a quote from the Zinn's book that says, if schools only focus on academic instruction and management in their efforts to help students attain academic success, they will fall short of their goals. It's another way of saying that we can't only focus on academics if we want to help students achieve academically. We have to focus on their ability to learn, on their readiness to learn, and then on their ability to handle what's going on inside their brains and inside their bodies that's getting in the way of learning. Very often it's helpful to understand how schools can actually create a social-emotional learning program in their schools that's sustainable, useful, and that supports everything that we're talking about for special needs kids and even for a regular ed population. So I'm going to take you through a step-by-step process that we have found most useful. Here we go. First one, the school goes through some kind of process to help identify core values. It can involve looking at mission statements, it can involve surveys, but the school should identify what it is we stand behind, what it is that we determine most important to us. Once we've done that, let's describe them in nuts and bolts terms. What does it look like in the classroom? What does it look like in the hallways? What does it look like in written materials? Then, some kind of assessment of, so how are we doing? What are we doing now? Does it fit for us? Are we meeting what we want to do? And where are the opportunities for improvement? Then, deciding what do we need to address first in those opportunities and making some decisions about how we want to proceed. An action plan, looking at the outcome. Then, under what time frame do we want to do it, and how are we going to do it? What's the specific content that we want to make sure to address in our classroom, with our coaches and teams, in after-school programming, in parent programming, and to the degree we can impact the community, how can we get that in line as well? Then we want to look at what specific skills do we need to address, do we need to teach, and how are we going to teach them? Then is the staff on board. Let's get the staff clear about what it is we're asking of them, how they teach to these skills, and how they incorporate them into their daily curriculum. Let's go ahead and do it. And then let's provide support for both the staff who are attempting to teach these skills and the students who are learning them. What kinds of consultation do they need? What kinds of ongoing support do they need? What kinds of resources do they need? How do we help them stick with it, focus on the issues, and deal with problems that come up with regard to whatever may present itself, whether it's student engagement, timing, or competing curriculum? Then, how do we know it's being done and how do we know it's being effective? And look at how we're doing all of those things with regard to behavior and how we're helping all of our students, special and regular ed, be part of a global citizen network. Once we've done all that, let's take it back and say, so now where are we? And do the process again. That, in a nutshell, is how a school can bring about an effective social-emotional program that's school-wide and sustainable. Some specifics. SEL programs should be developmentally appropriate. So what you do in early elementary is different than later. What you do in middle school is different than elementary or high school. What you do in high school is different than, obviously, elementary or middle school. It needs to be organized. It can't be helter-skelter. So often we hear educators saying, yeah, I do that in my classroom. They do teachable moments. Teachable moments are wonderful, but they're not enough. We need to be organized so that we can teach to what's been already done and it can be additive. Programming should be form-fit for every school, for every grade, every classroom, because each school, grade, and classroom has its own challenges, has its own unique personality, and educators need to have some flexibility to make it work for them. We need to build a common language. And building a common language, what we're doing is we're building a culture of social-emotional competence. Culture is made up of language, and it's made up of norms. So if we build norms that are social-emotionally supportive, and if we have a common language to address social-emotional issues and be able to teach students to reference social-emotional competencies, we're really moving in the right direction. Flexibility with consistency. It sounds like an oxymoron, But we want there to be some consistency so that students know what we're talking about and they can apply them from year to year to year. But there needs to be flexibility so that educators can form-fit them to the needs of their particular classroom. Especially with special needs kids, we have to have some flexibility because some students will learn better visually, some will learn better auditorily, some will learn better one-to-one. So we have to build in some flexibility so that we can teach in a way our special needs students can learn. There need to be specific lessons so that students learn these skills. It can't just be the teachable moment. We would never teach reading by saying, well, the student will have to read in so-and-so class. They'll figure out how to read. No, we have to teach the mechanics as well, in addition to supporting it throughout the curriculum. We have to integrate it throughout the curriculum intentionally. It can't be accidental. It should be intentional so that the student gets exposed to these issues throughout the school day. And finally, and this is a key one, administration as well as educators have to recognize that social-emotional learning is a priority throughout the school curriculum. And this sometimes takes some work with the parent population as well. And we have to make our case. It's not hard to make our case, going back to the research done earlier, that social-emotional learning is a key element to our special needs kids being as effective and successful as they possibly can. There needs to be support, as I mentioned earlier, with consultation, and we find very often that someone on the staff or a few people on the staff become champions. They're the ones that really understand the value and really understand the need, and they press for making sure that these things are being done, that they don't get lost in the shuffle or they don't fall off the radar. What specifically are we talking about? Building what I'm calling micro skills. What goes into listening? What goes into empathy? What goes into perspective taking? What goes into relationship building? And breaking those things down. CASEL has a whole guidebook of curricula that have scientific support that say we are effective and able to do those things. We want to teach general problem-solving methods. This goes back again to the Stetson presentation. We have to be able to teach students how to break down problems so that they can address them effectively, feel confident in doing them, and can reduce their level of anxiety or stimulation so that that's not the only problem they're trying to deal with, but they're getting to the issue that's come up. We want to help them build a set of core values. Without core values, social-emotional skills can be dangerous. Think about Bernie Madoff. This is a man who had great social-emotional skills. He was persuasive, he was engaging, he engendered trust from his clients, but he had no core, no character core of fairness, of what's just, of what's right. So he took advantage and lied and cheated. It's dangerous to build social-emotional skills without also building that sense of core values. Additionally, we want to build a climate that's pervasive throughout the school. So it can't be just one classroom or one grade or one special ed program that's building social-emotional competence. It should happen throughout the school. Now, sometimes in self-contained settings, when I go into a school district and they ask me where I want to start, I'll sometimes say I want to start with the special ed programming because sometimes it's a self-contained part of the district and it's easier to work within and then spread it out from there. Because special educators get this. They do this to a degree every single day. But it's not enough to only focus on special ed. It needs to be school-wide because special ed students enter into the general population before school, during school, after school, in classes, outside of classes, on weekends, so on and so forth. So we want to make sure to engage the entire school population and community in this process. Parent support. We would never expect students to learn just by what they do in the classroom. Practice at home is a key element. And very often, we need to work with parents to develop their social-emotional competence. because sometimes it's hard for them to support what the students are learning. And we even do upside-down education where we have the students go home and teach the parents. Great experience for everybody. The parents love it, the students love it, and it's a very effective way for the students to learn what they're learning by teaching. We want to provide educators opportunities for innovation and collaboration while still addressing the issues in the curriculum, both with regard to social emotional skills and building character. We want to empower the students and the faculty in learning these skills. Bottom line, we want it to be fun. If it's not fun, faculty is going to get tired of it, students are not going to be engaged, and there are many, many ways to make this kind of learning fun because it won't feel like the usual academic learning experience. And it'll seem more generalizable. When the student asks, why do I have to learn this stuff? The question will be more easily answered than it might be for math, history, or even science. These skills will help the student for the rest of their lives, help them be better parents, help them be better employees and employers, and help them to be better citizens. So there are three concerns that I've encountered mostly from faculty, mostly from educators, in going in and attempting to teach social emotional literacy. The first one is, look, we're busy, we're already full, we don't have time to do anything else. We don't have time to add anything to our already busy schedule and already full expectations. The second concern is, excuse me, but perhaps you didn't hear me the first time. There is no time. I'm busy. I have too much to do already. And obviously the third thing is time. My response to that is twofold. One is, in the long run, doing social emotional programming actually saves time. It reduces the amount of time you have to redirect. It reduces the amount of time you have to repeat. It reduces the amount of time you have to address other issues that are not learning supportive. It reduces the amount of time you have to fill out reports, accident reports, incident reports. The other part is, my experience is in education, there's always too much to do. And so what we're talking about is it's never an issue of time, but always an issue of priorities. Every educator could teach more than they're able to teach given the amount of time they have. So we have to make decisions about what's most important to address. That's why the school has to take this on as a priority, that this is important and this is a vital part of the student's educational experience. One of the most powerful messages I ever experienced with a faculty that I was working with is the school superintendent came in, talked to the faculty and said, look, if you don't get to page 78 in the math curriculum and only get to page 72, that's okay if the extra time is spent doing social emotional skill building. What a powerful message from the superintendent to give to his faculty. Loved it. So here are the outcomes we can experience. Students will have increased attention, increased performance, reduce the need for redirection, increase student sense of confidence, and the increased likelihood of success. Kind of a summary of what the research has shown and what my experience over the last 25 years has been. In this day and age, reducing the risk of violence is on everybody's short list of what we have to do, both in and out of school. Teaching students ways of dealing with their emotions, teaching them alternatives to violent acting out, teaching them to care about those others in their community is a key element in reducing the risk of violence. So think about this. What kind of people do you want your students, regular ed students, high-risk students, what kind of people do you want them to be in 20 years? What kinds of skills do you want them to have? How do you want them to interact with others? I love this quote from Abraham Lincoln. And I think we're seeing some of that now. By watching what's going on now in politics, I think we can even see more potently how important it is that social emotional competence be a key element in our future leaders. So now what I'd like to do is talk about the key elements in doing social emotional learning, school-wide social emotional learning program. There are essentially three key elements. There's the content, or the what goes into programming, the process of the how of doing it, And then the third element, which is often the element that's not attended to by educators, which is gaining buy-in, or what I call social marketing. So let's first talk about the what. We want to include a whole set of skills. So life skills, social-emotional competencies, building positive peer relationships, building problem-solving and coping skills, and building positive active involvement in the school and the community. Next, how do we go about doing that? Well, we got to build community from the top down. Culture and community rests in the arms of the staff. Since students cycle through the school building every 3 to 6 years, the culture is going to change if we focus solely on students. Ideally, staff remains more than 3 to 6 years. So by focusing on staff development, we can build a culture and community that is sustainable. So we want to focus in on staff development. We want to make sure that the timing is there. So we look at competing curricula, competing programming, and making sure to carve out time for doing this work. We want to decide on how we want to roll out this program, whether it's grade by grade, whether it's across grades or school-wide. And then how do we allocate the resources that we have? How much money do we have? How much time do we have? Who do we identify and how do we identify how we're going to roll this out? Additionally, we want some clear implementation outcome criteria. This makes it easier for the staff. We want to have regular monitoring with indicators that make sure we're doing what we expected to do, and we can capture any difficulties or glitches early on so that we don't get to the end and go, oops, we missed this. Again, we want this as a recognized priority in the mission and vision of the school. Without that, very hard to make a case for it, very hard for it to be sustainable. Administrative support is key. Without administrative support, it's very hard to maintain and sustain programming because priorities keep shifting. So what we found is in the programs that we have that are sustainable, there seems to be one element that's consistent, and that's the active involvement of the decision maker, usually the principal, in the programming that we're doing for social-emotional competence. I want to make sure there's adequate staffing, that we're not just squeezing this in as an afterthought, and that there's sufficient time set aside for implementation into the curriculum and also for professional development. Also, it can't be funding that only lasts a year. So very often schools will find a grant for a year that supports this, and then that grant disappears, and oops, all of a sudden support for this disappears. There should be some sustainable way of supporting this program. It's a relatively inexpensive program to instill. So I encourage you to find ways to stabilize the funding. Well-planned, high-quality professional development, ongoing supervision and consultation is a key element to this for all the reasons I just described. When you're doing instruction, it should foster skills and opportunities and recognition in the classroom that provide a foundation for social-emotional competence. There are so many opportunities in the classroom, both with regard to curriculum, with regard to learning styles, with regard to even how you set up your classroom that supports social-emotional competence. Group learning styles, active learning. It's up to every educator to consider those things and implement the ones that make sense for their classroom, team, or school. Now, here's the most challenging part for educators, the social marketing. In my experience, educators love curriculum. They love to go through books. They love to find lessons. And more recently, they also like scientific, evidence-based programming. I'm with it. Where there's a challenge is in the social marketing element, is in taking the time to get buy-in for the programming. Without doing an effective job of social marketing, we can have the best curriculum in the world, but it won't stick because there are so many competing elements out there that something else that has better social marketing, better buy-in, will take its place. So I have here some suggestions for how to do effective social marketing. In other words, getting the word out so that you can get buy-in. Okay, here we go. Social Marketing 101. It should be stimulating, so using technology, interactive learning. It should be relevant, Every student, every staff member, every parent, every administrator should be able to ask the question, why should I care about this, and have compelling answers about why I should care about this. Also, the information that you put out about this programming should be engaging. So I encourage you to use pop culture references. It should be interesting and fun. So social emotional lesson planning should also use pop culture, should be interesting, should be fun, should be relevant, and it should always be connected to, why am I learning this? Why is this important to me? And that should be an intentional message that's part of the lesson or part of the information that goes out to colleagues, peers, and administrators. By addressing all of these stakeholders, you are more likely to have a sustainable program. And here are ways you can get that word out. Presentations, newsletters, digital media, letters, cable TV, sending out ongoing updates about what's being covered in the classroom, media write-ups, visitors' days, websites, Facebook pages, you name it. We have many, many ways of getting the word out. Take advantage of many of those as you can. It's a way of getting everyone's buy-in and also a way of educating. And especially in a special ed population, it's a way of getting the word out effectively and repeatedly. There's a saying in public relations that it takes 7 exposures to something to recognize it and 28 exposures to remember it. So don't worry about redundancy here. Get the word out in as many ways as you can. I included here kind of an example, a little map of how a feelings lesson might look in different kinds of classrooms. And this was done by a colleague of mine, Lynn Moore, and she's a wonderful educator and a social emotional consultant. So you can see as you look at this that it can be implemented a lot of different ways in a lot of different venues. I encourage you to implement it in every classroom every day. The more it's implemented, the more sustainable, and the more it sticks, and the more generalizable. This best behavior is an example of a lesson that might be taught, say, for listening. It was developed by Dr. Maurice Elias and his team out of Rutgers University. And it's a very simple method for listening, or learning to listen effectively. And it uses the BEST acronym for body posture, eye contact, saying the right words, and tone of voice. I would love to pass this on to the politicians that we are dealing with these days so that they can learn their best behavior. But for now, I think we're going to have to settle for our K through 12 special needs and regular ed students. I've mentioned problem solving throughout this presentation. This is an example of a problem solving protocol that we have found particularly effective in regular ed, but key in working with special ed. In fact, I've developed it and expanded it from a method that was developed out of Rutgers and the Elias team and added so that my work initially was with special ed populations in schools, in hospitals, and in treatment programs. And I found that this problem-solving protocol was incredibly effective in working with those populations. And I'll just very quickly walk you through it. Whereas most problem-solving methods start with identifying the problem, which logically makes sense. What we know is that when we have a population who are anxious, when we have a population who are scared, and when we have a population who are struggling with different emotions or learning issues, they come in with feelings that impair their ability to learn. Until we help them deal with those feelings, it's very hard for them to deal with the problem. So step 1 is to deal with the feelings. What are you feeling? Identify it clearly and specify it. How is it you're feeling? Step 2 is calm yourself down so that we can quiet that amygdala and help you begin to think about what's going on instead of just reacting. Anyone who's worked with special needs kids knows they go from 0 to 60. They experience the feeling and then they act without much thought. We want to slow down that process. By slowing down the feeling, by calming them down, they're able to follow through with the rest of the problem-solving method, which then follows a much more logical process of what's the problem, set a goal. What kinds of solutions can you think? So brainstorming is a way to think about that stuff. What might happen if you do each of those solutions? Pick the one you like best, plan it out, scan it for difficulties, and then do it. And consider, how did it work? This problem-solving protocol becomes a series of lessons where you go into detail teaching how to do each of these things. With special ed and special needs kids, you usually have to slow down and take each of these steps and then build it additively until finally you take them through the entire process. It's an incredibly effective way to help students deal with issues, because what you can also do then is when issues come up, you can create ways for them to think through whatever issue came up using the problem-solving protocol. You could do this on a one-to-one basis. You could do this in a timeout. You could do this in a problem-solving group. You can do this if you have to send someone to the office. There are many, many ways to do it. The key here is that the student knows the problem-solving method and that the staff member understands what it is we're trying to do, knows the social-emotional competencies we're hitting on, and also understands the method and protocol. In the classroom, here are some ways you can address SEL. Combine it with your traditional academics, as we described earlier. Provide specific social-emotional programming for kids with special needs. We know that the special needs kids may learn more slowly, may need more redirection, may need to have things broken down, may need more specificity, may need it more auditorily versus visually. Know your audience. Build the social-emotional curriculum based on the needs of your audience. Teach in a way they can learn. Make sure all the support system knows what you're doing, is fluent in what we're talking about, and is able to provide the support that students may need to use their social-emotional competence. So here are some things to think about. How would your students benefit? How would the best 25% benefit? And how would the ones with the most challenges benefit? What are you already doing to reinforce their social-emotional skills? And how might the programming that I'm describing help everyone in the building? Finally, where might you see the opposition to doing this? What kinds of questions would come up? What kinds of answers do you have for those questions? How might you offset it? When I was working with the state of Kansas in developing their social, emotional, and character education learning standards statewide, one of the things we did is we had the writing group, which was about 18 educators from around the state, write down every criticism, every question, every venomous observation that they could imagine their community generating in opposition to what they wanted to do. We wrote those down, and we passed them around, and we had each work group write responses to those, and those responses were incredible. If you're interested in seeing those, you can go to the Kansas Department of Education website, go to Social, Emotional, and Character Education Programming, and they have frequently asked questions, and their answers to those questions, they are brilliant. I encourage you to seek those out. Finally, come up with some kind of action plan. If you are choosing to do this, how might you go about doing it, and who do you need to involve? That wraps up my presentation, and I hope now that you're as excited as I am about social-emotional learning and its potential to help all of your students to succeed, even those who've struggled most to achieve in a regular education framework or a special education framework. This applies to everyone. Even the adults in the building can benefit from this. Wow, I see that we've received hundreds of questions from the audience. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the program back over to Clay, who will be moderating the question and answer portion of this webinar.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate that. I like this most recent comment we got in from one listener, Judith, said, I feel your passion through the webinar. That's just awesome. I've certainly been enjoying this as well. So much to dig in on here and so many topics of interest to our listeners here. We've got thousands of folks here, lots of questions. We will try to get to as many as we can. So Ed, here's the first one. What is the best way to get started with SEL?
That's what a basic great question to start with. Best way to get started is, if you're the person in your school or in your classroom that cares most about this, is seek out a decision maker, usually the principal, because you'll need their support at some point. Let them know what you're thinking about. The next step then is to pull together some kind of representative committee across the school or across the special ed district or across the special ed department, whatever organized group you hope to work with, because what that does is it spreads out some of the responsibility and idea generation. We found it's very hard for just one person to make this happen. You really need a representative group that would include people who are willing to champion it. And also I encourage schools to include naysayers, because you want to hear the concerns, you want to hear the questions that are out in the community. Set reasonable goals, have a reasonable timeline. Also, if possible, if there's resources available, have some kind of external consultant, have someone who comes in from the outside, hears what the issues and ideas are, and can make suggestions. It really keeps people on task and focused. If there's no possibility for people to do something like that, another alternative is to consider online course certification. There's an online course available on social emotional learning through St. Elizabeth's and Rutgers in New Jersey, and in the resource page I think we have a web address for that. I encourage you to seek that out.
Fantastic. Seems like there's no shortage of resources out there. It's obviously a big topic these days. How do you help a school change the climate to make SEL an important part of the entire school day? I mean, lots of people ask about math classes and different things, and I think the question is, how do you take it through all different facets of the school day?
Yeah, I think you have to make your case. I think you have to understand and get that requisite value from your audience. Why should they care about this? What's important about this? I think you have to cite the data that we have and that we talked about in the meta-analysis. You have to cite the benefits not only to the students but to the staff and to the community. You have to let them know that it's not a tremendously expensive initiative and it really pays huge benefits. And finally, find your champions. Find the people who are passionate about the work, recruit them, and get them involved, because you don't have to sway everyone in a school. You just have to get a significant tipping point of people that will embrace the change, that will embrace the initiative, and that will make it happen.
Gotcha. So it's really less around, going to the math teacher and saying, here's what you do. It's about building and rallying support and buy-in, and then eventually everyone will join in. Is that
exactly
how you look at it?
Yes.
You touched on this briefly in some of your comments, but listeners want to know, is there evidence-based SEL curriculum? Could you give us an example?
Yeah, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of evidence-based curricula. Rather than me try to identify them all here, what I encourage our audience to do is to go to CASEL.org, CASEL.org. They have put much time and energy into reviewing these evidence-based curricula and identifying who they're for and what they do. It's almost like a Consumer Reports. If you've ever looked at the Consumer Reports for cars, they just identify all the different areas. And they have these both for elementary, middle school, and for high school. A couple of curricula that I found particularly useful for a widespread group of students, second step curricula, and also the social decision-making curricula. These are things that a lot of the schools and districts that I've worked with have embraced and found helpful.
Great. Thanks for those examples. How do you support SEL students while maintaining the rigor and standards for teachers and administrators?
Yeah, that's the $64,000 question, isn't it? There's always competing priorities. There are always new initiatives. There are always new mandates from state departments of education. So it's really important to make this a priority, to gain buy-in from the decision makers, which would include administrators. It might include the board. It might include the parent community. And then to provide the kind of external support that keeps it moving forward. So consultation, ongoing reading groups or study groups, and the other thing is to make sure that every single educator that you're trying to reach has effective professional development. That we're not asking them to do something that's over their heads, that they don't feel competent in doing, that they don't feel well trained to do, because that will really make it so difficult and cause educators to be hesitant in implementing this kind of work. So doing effective, solid, ongoing professional development is really a key.
Great. We've touched a couple times here based on people's questions on professional development, getting buy-in, really how to work with the staff in the building on these issues. But they've got other issues to find too, right? Data-driven instruction and test scores are really at the forefront of most people's minds these days. So keeping that squarely in view, how do we get them to really allocate the time and have true buy-in to investing in SEL for students?
See, that's the beauty. You make a great point here. That's the beauty of a social emotional learning initiative, is that it's not an either-or decision. So many of educational decisions are, well, do we put our energy in math, or do we put it in reading, or do we put it in social studies or science? This supports every element of academic development. And so what we're doing here is we're saying that by doing a social emotional learning initiative, we are supporting academic success, but at the same time we're also, improving school climate, we're improving school culture, and we're improving the social emotional skills of our students that allows them to learn better and act better in the community. In a special ed setting, developing that set of skills really potentiates their ability to learn, generalize, and act in a way that I think all of us would be proud.
Great. This is very exciting. So let's take another cut at this. How does this vary with age? So are the principles the same across all grades that we teach kids, or does that change by age and by grade?
Well, the principles grow out of the principles of the school community. So in many ways, they're the same. Kindness, cooperation, respect, responsibility are often things that are brought up as this is what we believe in, this is what's important to us as a school community. What does change with regard to grade is in what order we address them and what language we use and how much depth do we go. Ideally, what we hope is that that schools build upon the social emotional skills the way they would build upon reading or math skills, that it's additive, that what's learned in kindergarten is added on in first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way up through high school, that the high school ways of addressing social emotional competence are much more reflective and encourage conversation and discussion and considering ambiguous sorts of problems and challenges. So we're really changing the complexity of it over time, assuming that we've built upon what was learned the previous year. So it is different, but the concepts are the same.
Gotcha. We got some good questions from folks who have PBIS in their schools, and some questions: how do you blend SEL with PBIS initiatives?
We've done a lot. By using the PBIS model and then inserting and creating social emotional learning lessons, learnings, messages, and even building an element of the social emotional competence building into the PBIS programming, there's a real value both to PBIS and to social emotional competence based. Social emotional competence is really about preparing students and preventing some of the behaviors that we don't want to see. So it's really a very logical marriage with PBIS.
Gotcha. And do you see that it ever becomes, how do you prevent it from becoming too much when you're doing SEL and PBIS in a school, and people are busy, and PBIS is already a lot to bite off for some folks.
Well, it's an interesting question. You're right that PBIS, depending on how it's designed for that particular school, can take a fair chunk of resources. I think what we're talking about here, though, is the SEL programming being an element in PBIS, but broader, but being integrated throughout the academic curriculum, throughout the school day, throughout coaching, throughout parent involvement. So it's a much broader process that can be inserted without huge commitments of time.
Great. So how can we get parents engaged in doing their part at home to help build social and emotional skills? This was near and dear to my heart as a recent parent.
Oh boy, this is a vital question that we are consistently wrestling with, because as every special educator has probably experienced, sometimes the parents that we most want to engage are the ones we can't get to, the ones that are working two jobs or are unavailable for the school initiatives in one form or another. So what we've found is that sending homework, letting parents know what's going on at parent-teacher conferences, building in a buy-in strategy at athletic events or at things that parents want to come to. If there are parent-teacher not conferences, but parent-teacher meetings, or having ongoing parent teaching, that's another way to really address what can be very hard. I would also encourage there to be a kind of representative group of parents to be a part of the social emotional learning initiative, because not only can they spread the word better than educators can, but they also have some great ideas about what needs to be done and how to bring it home.
Fantastic. Let's talk about principals and staff for a second. How do you help them understand the connection between teaching SEL and creating a warm and welcoming school environment?
Oh, boy. I think that most already know. I rarely experience people saying this isn't a way of doing that. More likely they're going to say, we have other competing priorities. We have other things that we have to focus on. So I really think that making the case that you're not giving up on the other things that are important to administrators and to parents, but that this is an added benefit that will really benefit children throughout the rest of their lives. I think it's a very hard thing for educators to resist. And once you present the information and the data, I think that the experience is there. You can even, actually, if you're really running into trouble, if you really have a very hard-nosed, academically focused person or group of people, I think you can bring in testimonials. I think but if you had a consultant that was effective, they can address some of those concerns. And the information's out there. It's a question of accessing it and then having the ear of the administrator so that they can hear what you're hoping they'll hear.
Right. So we got a lot of district leaders on this webinar. And if you were in their shoes and you just listened to this webinar, what are 3 things you think they can do to help move SEL implementation forward in their own districts based on what we've been talking about today? What are some tactical things you could encourage them to do when they ring off today after they finish the quiz?
Well, first off, for all the educational administrators that are listening, I give them a huge amount of credit for the work they do. And for me to suggest tactical processes is really, this is how they live and breathe every day. So I'm not sure I can add to what they already know. What I would suggest, though, is know your audience and really, really, really focus on gaining buy-in. be prepared with the information that the audience cares about. If it's board members, if it's parents, if it's faculty, or even if it's students, know what they care about and understand how social-emotional initiatives address their concerns, address their issues. And more than just promises, have the data behind you. Have the understanding that social-emotional learning helps all of these different facets. It may be, well, how much is it going to cost? It may be, how do we know that culture is going to improve? It may be, we have a bullying issue. Is this going to address bullying? Yes, we have data for all of those things. Just be prepared for that. Understand that it's not going to take away from academics. It's actually going to make academic performance better. I think that's a very compelling and very persuasive position.
Gotcha. Let's go back to talking about some of these age-based differences. And I've got an interesting question here. What is the number one skill a first grader, a third grader, and a fifth grader ought to master in terms of SEL?
I'm sorry, could you? No, I'm kidding. Number one by far is listening. Listening. If your students are not very good at listening, it's very hard to have an impact in any other area. So that's usually where we start. It's usually the beginning of the year, and we focus in on listening across the curriculum, across the board, and that's one of the first skills we teach. The next, I would suggest, is perspective taking. Seeing the world through others' eyes. By doing that, you're beginning to sow the seeds for their ability to work in teams. Cooperative learning, reflection becomes more natural, so they begin to understand what the other person's experience is and perhaps even empathize with what they might be feeling. And then we want to focus in on problem solving, taking the basic skills that they've learned in social-emotional learning and applying them to real-life issues that have come up either in the classroom, in the school, or in their own lives. One of the great things that I've seen in school districts where I've consulted is that in the early elements of the programming, they're teaching problem-solving skills and creating issues to be addressed so they could practice. But not too long into the initiative, they take real life issues that come up. So if there's a problem on the playground, for example, and they'll bring it back to the class and ask them to use their problem-solving skills as a class to figure out what to do about this particular issue or problem. So it really moves the responsibility and the ability of figuring out what to do about these issues from the teacher to the entire class, the school, or even the community.
Gotcha. So, given that we live in a data-driven world, you got to wonder, are there ways to track the benefits of the SEL lessons you discussed today? Could you do pre- and post-test surveys of students? Is there some other way that you could think about gathering data on efficacy here?
Yeah, there is. Certainly pre- and post-test will be able to gauge the performance on a particular skill. But it really doesn't give you a sense of climate. It really doesn't give you a sense of culture. And the best we have so far is to do climate surveys, which at least give you a snapshot of what's going on in the school at that moment. And when I've worked with districts, we've done climate surveys of students. We've done them with faculty. We've also done them with community, especially parents, to get a sense of how are we doing, what are the ongoing issues that still need to be addressed, and how effective are we at addressing those. So that's really one good way to assess that.
Beautiful. Well, Ed, unfortunately, that is all that we have time for today. We still have hundreds of questions pouring in. I want to ask people to stay on for more information about the quiz, which will come up after this. So just if you're about to click out, hold on. The quiz will be there momentarily. But I really want to give Ed a warm thanks for being on the SPED Ahead webinar series, for working with Presence Learning on this, and for really providing a lot of valuable lessons and insights. And I think there's the amount of questions and the number of people here are a big testament to really the benefit you provided to all of us by sharing your experience, Ed. So thank you.
Thanks, Clay. It's a passion for me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share it with your audience. So thanks so much.
It shows, and it's such a hugely important area that you're focused on. We've been amazed both by the huge audience for you and also for Dr. Stetson. Both of your webinars are actually now available on demand. Both have been extremely popular. I encourage everyone who's been on this webinar, who hasn't seen the Dr. Francis Stetson webinar, to also check that out. Already there is a lot of anticipation for a third and final webinar in this winter-spring series, Success for Every Learner. Our presenter is Dr. Ross Green, who will provide an overview of the approach known as Collaborative and Proactive Solutions, also known as CPS. CPS is having a ton of success in helping every student succeed, so please be sure to register if you have not already. So thank you again for participating in our SPED Ahead webinar program. We here are committed to unlocking the potential of every child and to providing you, our listeners, with the best professional development possible. For more information or to see a live demo of our online therapy services, please go to presencelearning.com or email us at schools@presencelearning.com to learn more about our online speech therapy, occupational therapy, and mental and behavioral health services. Thank you so much for making the SPED Ahead webinars a part of your day.